Time for Wine Talks with Paul K.
Fascinating story.
This is Robert Mondavi from the Michael Mondavi Winery.
That tastes a lot of wine.
Having a conversation with Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary.
Michael Silacci, Opus One Winery.
Incredible conversation with Dr. Mia Ruth.
No matter what, you're definitely going to feel better.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with moi. Absolutely, absolument. Actually, I'm working on my French. I had a French lesson this morning. So moi, me, conversation with me. I've got a lot to say, and this is going to be the first of a couple of rants about what's going on in our industry to help you as a consumer and a listener to understand some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Some of these things might be very touchy subjects for some of the larger houses. The stuff needs to be told, and the conversations need to be had. We just got off a podcast with Don and Petey Kladstrup, which is an incredible story about wine and war and the Nazis in France. And it's got to tell the stories. And they actually encountered during their research for the book, which was 2001, some resistance by the chateau to tell their story. And I think that's wrong. Wine is about the story. So we're going to talk a story. So in today's rant, they ruined it. They failed. They failed not only as a business, but they failed you. They failed me. They failed the consumer of wine. And that's the Winc story. You may have heard of them. You've probably seen their ads socially. They're a large company. It's reported before they went Chapter 11 or bankrupt that they were doing something like $80 million a year. Isn't it hard to imagine that a company could be bringing in $80 to $100 million a year and not make any money and fail? And I'll tell you how. And I'll tell you what the failure is. The failure is not the financial part. That happens. So, COVID has created a lot of consternation for a lot of businesses. For the wine business, so you all know, all of us did really well. It was really incredible that 2020 was just a freaking great year. Sold a lot of wine. Lots of branded stuff. Caymus, Austin Hope, Silver Oak, all of our brands, imports. It didn't matter. People were home. They were drinking wine. They had a little more disposable income because they weren't traveling, and so they were buying wine. But Winc was a different story. Winc is out of Playa del Rey, California. It's over by the beach cities. It's was started as Club W, which you may have heard of way in the back, probably 10 years ago, was a wine club, not like the Wine of the Month Club. You got to select your wines. But the difference was, and this is where we're going to get into the crux of this situation. Before I get to that, I'm going to talk about the old days just a little bit, because having this conversation with the Kladstrups kind of reminded me of the days of working my dad's wine shop at Palisades Wines and Spirits, and what wine was like then. And I contacted a lot of my friends in the industry to discuss when they thought the transition to this Winc-style business forced the hand of a lot of makers and changed the way we consume wine. And we'll talk about that. But the wine shop back in the day, there was a handful of winemakers in Napa Valley, probably like 50, maybe not even that many, maybe 27 on one count. They made wine earnestly. They made wine honestly. They didn't put stuff in it. Probably much of it was organic back then, because organic was not a new thing. Wine was always organic, right? I mean, they didn't have pesticides, insecticides all the time. But it was a more honest time in the wine business. In fact, I tell this story a lot. Sometimes the winery would put 100% Cabernet Sauvignon on the label because they were proud of the fact it was 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. It wasn't butchered by blending it with other things. We know better now that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when you do blend. But at that time, it was much more innocent. And the customers were looking for wines of just good value and good quality. And that was how the Wine of the Month Club started, was my dad finding those wines. But it was a different time. The only jug wines back then really were, we call jug wines, I don't even use the term anymore, Gallo. And so that's where Gallo started, the idea of a screw cap. And they had 1.5 liter bottles. They were sort of squatty. I remember stocking the shelves. They had Rhine wine. They had a Burgundy, which of course would be against the rules to use that term now. They had, it was called Hardy Burgundy, right? So those are screw caps, and that's kind of where the misnomer that a screw cap today is of poor quality is because of the days of the 70s with Gallows jug wines. But it was honest. There were some imports that were rather prolific. There was Matus, I think that's still around. There was Lancers that came in a little ceramic bottle. There was Blue Nun's Liefraumilch, blue bottle actually. But that was it. Much more honest, the industry. As times changed, we fast forward. We had White Zinfandel created in 1974. This became a huge seller for Sutter Home and created such a demand for sweet pink wine that you couldn't even find Zinfandel grapes. And there's a great story we'll tell later about Fred Franzia, recently passed, picking Barbera, calling it Zinfandel. We'll talk about that later. There were no shipping issues back then. My father could ship wherever he wanted to. Nobody really cared. There wasn't this political headwinds with wholesalers across the country. They didn't consider somebody shipping wine to a consumer in another state as a competitor. So it was live and let live at that time, even though it was probably illegal, because really prohibition in America was never repealed, only at the federal level. And so they removed the federal level prohibition of alcohol and put it in the hands of the state. And so there's 50 state laws, another subject altogether. But you could ship, no problem. That's how the Wine Month Club started. My dad, people left Palos Verdes, they retired to another state, and they'd say, please send me your wines. And my dad would send the wines, and that's how we got this business going. There were no compliance issues. There was no state regulators. There was no cease and desist orders. The other day, we got a cease and desist order from North Carolina for one customer. This gentleman ordered 26 bottles of wine, which is illegal in North Carolina. In a given month, you can order only 24. And so we're being fined by the state because we shipped 2 extra bottles accidentally. It wasn't our fault. The guy ordered them. We didn't catch that he had gone past his limit. Now we're at a cease and desist. But the point being, it was much more complicated. It's much more complicated today than it was. But wine was simpler. Wine was a beverage of great repute. It was a beverage of winding the day down. It was a beverage of, there was a little aristocracy about wine. There still is. I don't think that'll ever change, but it wasn't meant to be that way. It's an intimidating subject to some, but it kind of relied on that. It kind of relied on the fact that the people that were buying these wines were trying to experience something different than a scotch or a beer. And that's a simple point. I spoke with Kevin O'Leary about this, the famed Shark Tank. I spoke with Dan Berger, one of the great wine writers of our time. I spoke with Paul Mabray of Pix Wine, one of the great IT intellectual property type wine guys in this state. And we're trying to peel this concept back of what happened to Winc and why they put us as a consumer in this position. And I was looking for the era, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, when this concept of bulk wine, and bulk being just a quantity, became bulk wine of ill repute. Let's put it that way. There's always been bulk wine. Bulk wine in the sense of somebody makes a lot. And because wine is agricultural, you never know. I was reading a book the other day that the 1940 vintage in Burgundy, France was like a tenth of the regular vintage. So it ebbs and flows. You don't know. Climate change is real and has changed that. Now sometimes there are parts of the world that are growing more grapes than ever, and other parts that are growing less than ever. It's agricultural. It ebbs and flows. You never know how much wine you're going to get until you start to see the bud, and then you don't know. There's that one, I think it was 2018 in Bordeaux, when the swath of hail came and just stripped the vines clean of the path of the hailstorm. 10 feet to the left or 10 feet to the right of the hailstorm, all the vines are healthy, but the vines in the middle of the hailstorm are completely stripped. I mean, leaves, grapes, everything done. Nothing. So because it's agricultural, it ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's a lot, and sometimes there's not so much. Charles Shaw was the famed Trader Joe's wine was founded during the period of huge bumper crops and huge amounts of wine on the open market. And the open market is an important part of our industry. I would say, and I haven't got a firm number for anybody in the industry on this, but agreement that somewhere around 90% of all wine bottled is not fermented by the grower. And just to highlight something, if you're looking at a bottle of wine from California and it says estate bottled, that's the only rule that requires that winery to actually have grown the grapes and made the wine. All other wine that you see in a bottle, if it doesn't say estate, can be bought and sold on the open market. It can be bought and sold as grapes. It can be bought and sold once it's fermented in a big bladder. It can be bought and sold fermented and in the bottle. It can be bought and sold and fermented but still in the barrel. It can be bought and sold labeled. It's all open market. And most wine, of the wines you drink from your store, are bottled that way. So that's an important feature. The quality of that wine has nothing to do with the quantity that's being made at the same time. Obviously, when you're making something in gross quantities, it's harder to control the quality, but to ensure the quality. But it doesn't mean that if you buy a 20,000 liter vinyl bladder of Merlot from Spain, that because it's in 20,000 liters is bad. It just means it was made in bulk, and that will be blended or bottled the way it is, whatever happens. It's when the concept of producing an honest wine shifted and why Winc failed, in my opinion. This is all my speculation. This is my 32nd year. I've tasted 100,000 wines. I've seen a lot of different things come and go and a lot of ideas. And I brought this up last night with my wife. I said, I don't understand why people think they're going to create something new in the wine industry. It's 8,000 years old, at least. And when you think about it, what they did 8,000 years ago was pick a grape, ferment it, and store it. That's what they did. It's exactly the same as today. We have better equipment. We can make the grapes a little better. We can grow more grapes or less grapes. We can throttle the amount of sunlight it gets. All these things can occur. But when it's all said and done, we've just fermented a grape. And grapes have their own yeast on the skins. They'll ferment their own if we don't touch them. So really, it's pretty rudimentary and pretty basic, this industry, until we want to sell more, until we want to market it, until there's shelf space available to buy at the market and put a wine up there that maybe not as good as we hoped it would be, but because we can buy the position on the shelf, people will grab it. So Winc, in my opinion, all of this is my opinion again, set out to sell as many bottles as possible, as fast as possible. That was their objective. It wasn't the objective to bring the best wine to the table that they could for the price that they're charging. It was to see how low the price can go on the cost side, to see how much they can get for the wine to sell to the consumer, and hopefully, maybe, not dupe the consumer, but at least make margins on wines that aren't as good as they are priced. It's the way it works. Like any other product. If we're going to buy it and we're willing to pay $10 for it when what's inside of it only costs 50 cents, that's our prerogative as consumers to buy or not buy. But in this case, the wine wasn't really marketed that way. It wasn't meant to be how much can we pump into the system, the logistical system, the shipping and the boxes. To highlight that, a case of bottles today, if I wanted to go bottle a wine, which we do, pre-COVID, that same case, I'm talking about the glass and the cardboard box and the dividers that divide the box up, was $6.48. So something around 53 cents a bottle. That was it. Not the juice, not the cap, not the cork, not the transportation, not the profit, or nothing. It's just my cost to buy them so I can make a wine. Today, that same price is $16.60 or something. So it's gone up considerably post-COVID. So the cost of making wine has gone up. So the economics of wine are like this. If you and I wanted to make a decent wine, I just got this number recently from a very close friend of mine who's making wine in Napa Valley. If you and I wanted to buy a decent Cabernet Sauvignon and bottle it and want people to say, yeah, this is pretty good, I'm going to tell my friends, or I'm going to buy another bottle. It would be around $15 a gallon. Okay? That's just for the juice. Didn't talk about the glass yet. I already told you that price. Didn't talk about the label, the designer of the label, all that other stuff. $15 a gallon, which is around $40 for a case. So you and I start the winery. We go up to Napa, or we go to Lodi, or we go to Paso Robles. We find some open market juice. A lot of wineries, have extra juice. We pay them $15 a gallon. Now we have $40 worth of juice to put in a bottle. Now, jog the thought. When we pay this for this wine, we haven't made any profit on it yet. We haven't moved it yet. You got to pay for shipping. That's more expensive today. We're not sure of the appellation. We could blend it. If we buy Paso juice, fine, but we could blend it with some Lodi juice or some Napa juice and maybe extend it a little bit. That costs money to do. So we're into this thing for $40. And we produce this wine, and we're going to sell it, let's say $40 for the juice, $16 for the box, and then it's $56 plus some margin. You got $76, and then you got to transport. That's $86. The least expensive we could sell it for to a wholesaler is going to be like close to $100 a bottle, a case. Yeah. So just the sheer economics of palatable wine would force us into what would normally be then at that point, if it's $100 a case, on the shelf it's going to be, I don't know, $15, maybe $17. Okay. But that's pretty decent wine. If I could buy a wine for $17 that tastes as good as what I'm telling you we could buy for $15 a gallon, I'm okay with that. I would be happy to buy it. But the model's different when you are trying to produce as much as you can for as cheap as you can, to put as much as you can into the network. And I'm talking about the shipping network and the boxes, and to lower all those costs, to lower the cost of the box, to lower the cost of the case, to lower the cost of the glass, to lower the cost of the transportation per bottle, to lower the margins, to squeeze out skinny margins. You have to buy wine. That is, I'm going to shift a metric on you now, but I'll equate it for you. That's 50 cents a liter. 50 cents a liter. You know what a liter is, right? It's that plastic bottle you drink of water. That's a liter, generally 33 ounces. But 50 cents a liter is $4.50 a gallon. A case. That's right. $15. We just went from $15 for palatable, drinkable juice that you and I would put our names on down to $4.50. That's a third. So you can imagine that if you have to source consistently on a regular basis in giant volumes to supply this customer database that you've created called Winc, you have to pay very little for the juice. And I'm sorry, but in this industry, maybe once in a while, something pretty good comes from that. Some winemaker in the center of Spain or, some part of Italy has made this juice. You're getting it for 50 cents a liter, and it's actually, all right. It's never going to be great, but it's going to be all right. But that's not the case, because you constantly have to source these wines, this juice, this 50 cents a liter. Yeah, constantly, because you've got hundreds of thousands of cases going out a month that you've got to make sure are ready for you, or else, the domino effect of not having the wine on the shelf is going to kill you. So you're constantly sourcing and sacrificing the quality of what's going in that bottle, let alone the fact that the quality is definitely determined by the price you're willing to pay. I mean, that's just the way it is. And any business is like that. You can't expect to make a widget for $4.50 when your competitors make it for $15, and for them to be the same doesn't work. So what happens when I want to get a customer? So that's the premise of the wine side. We have pretty mediocre, if not bad, wine in a bottle. We dress it up with a fancy label. We do fun things. Maybe we're call it natural, which there's no definition for. Who knows what it is? We pay a nice designer a little extra money. They design a nice label, so when you look at it on the shelf or when you get it in the box in your home, you go, "Well, it looks like a nice wine." And you open it up and go, "Oh my God, there's a disconnect between what this label suggests this wine is and what it tastes like." So now I need customers. I've got a source of wine at 50 cents a liter. I know where the glass and bottles are, corks, all that's coming from, but I need customers. So what do? Well, in today's marketing, you got to buy a customer. You got to buy them. It's called an acquisition cost. That's what we do. That's what everybody does. Anybody that buys anything, whatever you buy, whatever brands you like, whether it's Tide, laundry soap, or Irish Spring body soap, there's an acquisition cost for them to get you to buy. It's all the advertising they pay for. It's all the coupons they put out there. It's all the things that go into you making that final purchase is called the acquisition cost. And in the case of this story, let's just say that the acquisition cost through Facebook, Instagram, those coupons you get in a box, $100 off a case, a Groupon, whatever it is they were hanging out, is $100. So it cost me $100 for you to buy from me. $100. Okay. So what do you expect? I hope I get that $100 back. So I need to sell, in the case of a regular margin wine, I need to sell almost $200 worth to get my $100 back to break even. But in the case of the Winc stuff, you don't need to sell as much because I'm paying so little. I'm paying 50 cents a liter for the wine. I can live with selling less wine to get my money back. But it doesn't work. It didn't work. So when they're selling an acquisition cost or buying you for $100 to buy their stuff, and you only spend $80, and you never buy again because the wine's no good. And it was a fun experiment to try. I saw it online. I saw it on Facebook. This was really fun. Hey, I found this company, Winc. You tell your friends, but the wine comes, and you look at each other, and you gotta go, I don't know. Yeah, it was worth a try, but I only got $80. So what happened with Winc was they raised a bunch of money, bought these customers for $100, and this is not actual numbers, but just round numbers, it's just a theory, and then couldn't pay off the money that they spent, so they raised more money. Now it starts to look like a Ponzi scheme, right? I raise a bunch of money, I spend it all, can't afford what I spent, so I got to raise more money to cover those debts, and I keep doing it, and they did that about 6 times in the course of, I think it was 15 years. And it finally got to the point where, because the wine was crap, it flooded the marketplaces, it's everywhere, people are buying it, they're seeing the messaging everywhere, they keep trying it, it keeps failing them as a consumer, the wine keeps failing them, and all of a sudden, now they were bankrupt. Because eventually, they run out of pockets to pick to fund the last debacle. And that's what happened. And there's going to be more of these in our industry. And it's very sad because the almighty dollar, which is important profit, and it's a very interesting question that I ask a lot of my guests on the podcast, what would happen if profitability was not one of the metrics to sell wine? How different would the product be, and how different would we approach the marketing and the value of that glass? But needless to say, that's theory, not practical. Profit's part of it. And in this case, it drove a big company out of business, left a lot of sour grapes, pun intended, in the taste of people's mouths for buying wine online. And so here we are. a lot of things have happened on the internet through the marketing side that have shifted because Winc no longer is buying customers for $100. And the next company that folds, it's going to change it again. But what's all said and done, you as consumers and me as a consumer got stiffed. Some people got stiffed out of their money. Some of their customers actually lost money because they invested in the company. That'd be me like telling my customers at the Wine of the Month Club, hey, why don't you invest in my company? The share is $10,000, and then I go bankrupt. They lost their money. But you guys lost, and us consumers lost, in that we're going to be gun shy to try new things. We're going to be gun shy to not to veer away from our regular wine. The other day I was at the market, and I told the story before. She specifically told me that she wanted to buy something different than she always buys, but she didn't buy anything because it's hard. It's an emotional product, and when your emotions get damaged, like trusting in Winc and then going bankrupt because they send you crap, it's hard to recover from that. You've lost trust, and there's going to be more, like I said, and it's going to take a little while. And so my suggestion and my advice is take the recommendation of a trusted sommelier, take the recommendation of a trusted wine shop owner, take the recommendation of a trusted, and this is important, supermarket wine department manager. There are some very good ones. I've met many at various places in Southern California that I was so impressed with, that they cared about what was in their inventory, not just all the regular stuff. So trust in those people. Trust in your local wine shop. That's probably the best, because these people have an earnest, sincere approach to wine. I just got off a podcast with Don and Petey Cladstrup. I just told you that. And we had this wonderful conversation about the history of wine and what rolls up to today's brands. And it hit me that the Europeans, the old world, I'm not saying they're better than we are. I'm just saying that wine is about the story, and the story means something. The story has pedigree. The story creates quality. It recreates passion in the makers. And there are lots of great stories in America and in California as well. Obviously, the history of the stories in Europe are much older. And when you think about the war years, even the French Revolution and prior, these stories shape the passion of the people that make the wine for you. And so when you get a chance to understand those stories, they are represented in the bottle, the good ones. That's what you want. It's not a story to say I got this for $3 on Groupon. That's not a story. And like that poster and the bumper sticker and the buttons say, life's too short to drink bad wine. Life's too short to drink mediocre wine. Life is really to drink the best you can afford. And I think all of you can afford a properly made glass of wine. And so that's today's rant. More to come. Hope I didn't take off on too many tangents, but I'm raising the spear to get people in the mindset to taste good wine, properly made in the glass. Cheers.